travel and things in association with sun destinations, iconic destinations with amazing experiences, present In Conversation With. I am your host, David Batsoffen, and I almost forgot my surname, would you believe? And I'm joined today by a guest, the first time ever, from Taiwan, Keith Barnes. And Keith and I will be talking about a book that he's just put together with two co-authors. And the book is this huge volume, Birds of Greater Southern Africa. Keith, good morning, good afternoon, Taiwan time, and welcome to you.
Thank you very much, David. Really appreciate you hosting me, and very much looking forward to chatting about the book.
It's only a pleasure. I must just tell you, when I tried to look up what Taiwan time was so that we could figure this out, Taiwan doesn't feature on my phone until somebody said, "Do you have a Chinese phone?" And then it all became eminently
clear. Yeah, no, we're persona non grata with our neighbors.
Yeah,
but we don't mind. We just keep on carrying on.
You just keep on going, but we're not talking politics today. We're talking about this new book, which has just arrived on my desk, and it comes from. I'm just trying to think. It's a Helms Field Guide, and it's published by Sunbird Publishers, right here in South Africa. But as I said, you're in Taiwan, and this, although it says a Helm Field Guide, is not necessarily a field guide. It's a huge but beautifully illustrated book. And congratulations to both you, to Terry, to John, and of course the illustrators, John Gale and Brian Small, whose work is absolutely spectacular. And we'll talk about that a little later.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. It was definitely a passion project. When John and Brian and Terry and John Fanshawe originally released The Birds of East Africa, it was a real it was a real landmark field guide for their region. And the thing was just so gobsmackingly beautiful that immediately I had this idea in my head: wouldn't it be amazing to do this for our region? And so, as you may well be aware, Greater Southern Africa is not quite Southern Africa. It's a little bit more expansive in the classic sub-region. When I was a youngster, I was very fortunate enough to be able to travel to Malawi and Zambia very early in my birding career, as it were. It was incredibly frustrating because there was absolutely no field guide for those parts of the world.
Really?
And I had to basically come back to the Fitzpatrick Library because I was a student at the Percy Fitzpatrick Institute of African Ornithology. And I'd go through these old tomes, these old Bannerman books, and these, crusty old Moreau books. And I'd have to read through these like labyrinthine texts to try and figure out what I'd seen. And I mean, that was back in, the mid-90s when lots was happening in our own country that was very exciting and new. And it just never happened. I just assumed somebody's going to do a great field guide to these regions, and it never really happened. And so I used to actually give a little talk, which was slightly controversial. I used to call it End Birding Apartheid. And it was about the Southern Africans' obsession with the Kunene and the Zambezi rivers. But I'm glad I dropped that talk, because it sort of, apartheid was a whole lot more serious than a birding matter. Yeah. But so here it is. Finally, 30 years later, we have a book which actually does these countries to the north justice, but I think it also does the classic Southern African region justice. But unfortunately, 1,200 species, and you're trying to do a good job on all of them. It doesn't make for a small, portable, easily carried around.
Well, if you get that, and then there's there's a tree book. There's a tree book. There's a mammal. Sorry.
Coates Palgrave's book, right?
Coates Palgrave's, and then the mammals book, your book, and if you're a real academic, maybe Roberts, the big Roberts that was brought out. If you buy all of them, then they throw in a trailer for nothing, so you can keep all the books in a trailer at the back of your car. You don't have to put it in a backpack.
Now, David, I think a lot of people go into the field with apps these days anyway. The concept field guide's massively changing, and so this is the book that would be no sweat to have in your book, or in your car, or to have at home. And it's on hand in case you really need it. Because what I didn't want to do was gloss over those really, really tricky ID issues. And I think you can see that in the book. I mean, on some of the plates, I'm basically only treating 2 species or 3 species. And that's because there's a really gritty there.
With that in mind, let's just go. This is the opening page of the book. And it was, for me, I'm thinking, why did you go ostrich and African darter? You know, normally these bird books open with seabirds, with penguins. Your penguins are both in the front and in the back of the book. But
Right.
I thought, ostrich and darter. But now you can tell me, because you know.
Okay, so you've chosen a tricky one here for me, because you know, basically some birds just don't really have species that could be easily confused with. One of those, so it sort of stands alone. The
Really?
ratites.
You can't confuse an ostrich?
I hope not. I hate the word unmistakable, though. It's like one of my pet peeves. I despise that word in a bird book. Any bird is mistakable. Hopefully, the ostrich is as close to unmistakable as possible. Okay, so at least a full adult, right? If you see some chicks running, you might think that there's some guinea fowl or Franklins or something.
Yeah,
but anyway,
fair enough.
So there's a taxonomic order that happens within birds.
Yeah.
Ratites right near the front. The ostriches are ratites, so that's why that got there. The darter, unfortunately, got there because my cormorant plate was full. A darter really probably should go alongside, let's say, the cormorants, with which it could potentially be confused. But unfortunately, I wanted to do the 5 cormorants that we have in the region justice, so that plate filled up. And I figured over here, I do create, like within the intro text, which is different to a lot of other field guides, I try to put pointers within there as to where other confusing species might be, or useful identification information or other taxonomic information or things like that within those intro chapters. And so I do refer on the cormorant plate to the African darter being right on plate 1. It was a matter of convenience, let's put it that way. Not
fair enough. So let's go back. I just used this plate to show the incredible skills of your illustrators. And while I was looking through the book, and I mean, you could almost cut this up and frame these images. They are so beautifully done. And I'd wondered why most bird books, if not all bird books, are illustrated rather than photographed. And I should imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Keith, that it's easier for an author to do that and to have control together with his or her illustrator what they want out of the image, rather than trolling through stock photographs on the internet, trying to look for a species that they don't have a photograph with. And then it comes down to credits and buying images. And it just will, I mean, your book took 30 years to put together. That'll take a lifetime to try and do it that way.
Look, there's some great photographic field guides out there, don't get me wrong. And I think most birders end up buying a photographic field guide and a sort of class-driven field guide, because they both have their place. What you can see in this particular plate, which I think is really interesting, is you see the flight illustrations. We've captured those birds in perfect transverse position. And by transverse, we mean generally a bird that's flying away from you. And with all these illustrations, you can see the pattern on both the underwing and the upper wing. See this, the length of the legs. We get to control the narrative, as it were, by having illustrators get the proportions right, make sure we get every single feature. Like you say, going through the photos, we could probably look, and there's more and more photos these days. There's hundreds and thousands of people taking pictures these days. So it is out there, but, you know, there is a little bit more to saying, all right, I get this exactly perfectly. These birds are all in the exact same position, so we can compare apples to apples, not apples to pears. And then just a quick shout out to the illustrators. They are, I honestly think the collection of illustrators that we have for this book, and Fancy Peacock was a guest illustrator too for the Larks, which is a group he knows so well. I do think we have the finest collection of bird art illustrations for ID ever collated for the region. They're absolutely fabulous. These guys I was desperate to work with these guys. This was the only project I ever really desperately wanted to do, and I'm to do it with the best people.
Yeah, and I second that. I mean, really and truly, these are spectacular. I have a huge, as a wildlife photographer myself, I have a huge, what's the correct, envy and fascination for bird photographers, because I'm becoming more and more friendly with proper bird photographers, you know, the real deal. And you guys have an inordinate patience. You will sit in a hide for days, not eating, not going to the toilet, not moving, waiting for that shot, those that photograph. And I always go back to that image of the kingfisher that I think it was an Italian guy shot. Took him 6 years and 72,000 images, and it cost him his marriage. But he got the picture that he wanted.
Well, there you go. It takes a special type of OCD for that.
You better believe it. But I mean, you know, as I say, I want things to die in front of my lens, and they normally do, not on a regular basis, but when it happens quite quickly. You don't have to sit for 6 years to wait for a kill, or a lion to wander past.
You certainly get, you know, there's the spectrum, and we're on that spectrum. But I think you get guys like, you know, the guy you're describing, who's on an extreme things. I happen to sit on the other side. I'm a pretty impatient bird photographer. I like happy snaps. I'm not going to win any awards with my pictures, but, you know, if I can get a bunch of cool ID shots that I can then use in an app or something like that, that's more than I approach the game. So there's all sorts, I think.
Keith, you said in the beginning of our chat that this took you 30 years to put together. Surely there's like PTSD at the end of this, or some sort of post-traumatic depression that sets in when you've had a project for 30 years. You've sent it off to the publishers. They've done all the tweaks. It's now, they've said, thank you very much. It'll be on the shelves in X amount of weeks or months. And then you wake up the next morning and go, now what do I do?
No, not me, but I'm good. First of all, there's a little misunderstanding. I think the seed was planted 30 years ago.
Okay.
I really only got working on this about 5 or 6 years ago, and then momentum really gathered during COVID. I'm a tour operator as a business. I run birding and natural tours and bird photography tours, and so COVID just shut me down. You know, like everybody in the industry, it went from this, not like a slow. We fell off the cliff.
Yes.
And so this was a great passion project for me to distract myself for a couple of years and bury myself in something. And I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I think the book is that much better for me having had 2 full years to really concentrate on it. So I was quite, I used all my, and I am OCD. I used all of that and I buried it in this, and I focused on the minutiae of sub-specific variation within a whole bunch of birds, which has never been done before for a book for the region and things like that. So, I certainly think that I've used the time effectively, but I've also got other projects on the go. We're busy working on a habitats book, and there's all sorts of other things. And hopefully we've got spin-off projects coming from this book, including slightly more focused regional guides within the greater sub-region, so that we can have more portable products for people to carry around in the field.
Now, you also mentioned apps. And I know I have a birding app on my phone, which is sometimes useful and sometimes not. Depends if I know what I'm looking at, because otherwise you can't. And even if you have the book in front of you, you know, it's like an open book exam. People think open book exams are wonderful, but they're not. If you don't know your work, you're not going to know where to find the answer anyway. So open book doesn't help. And it's the same with the birding guide. If you think it's a lark and it's a pipit, well, then you're in dire straits. And I've done one of those courses and I still can't tell the difference. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So do you have an app for this book, or is there an app planned? Because I mean, that's the easiest way to carry this around.
Absolutely. There is an ebook, which is good. So that's at least portable on a phone kind of thing. The app, in order for us to develop an app, and I have to go back to the publishers and speak to them about this. I need budget to make it great. Because if it's great, I'm not going to make it. I don't want to do a B grade app. We've got an A grade book here. I do
you have indeed
world class. I don't want to do a B grade app. So, and they're great apps in the region for Southern Africa already. We've got fantastic competitors. So I need to really think about how I'm going to up the ante to make it that much more than what's out there. So the app situation is currently in limbo. Let's just say I'm in conversation with the publishers in July, and we'll take.
Yeah, because as you say, there are so many apps, and everybody wants to do one, and they're all similar, and you need that differentiation. Otherwise, what is your USP at the end of the day, other than it's fantastically illustrated? But having said that, and having spoken about the app, if I sit down to write an article for my travel blog, and it involves birds of some ilk that I've seen on a trip, I won't go to my phone app. I will pull one of my birding books off the shelf and go through that. Or if I'm really lazy, there's a go-to birder that I have in Joburg that I'll send him a picture and go, what is this? Because he can come back to me faster than I can find it in a book if I'm uncertain, of what it is. Unless it's an ostrich, in which case I know what I was looking at.
No, I think there's room for all of these different products, David. I saw a recent discussion online about are books dead? And of course, I was quite curious in this discussion because I just published a new book. And so I wanted to know, what was the sense out there? And I would say 90% of people who responded were saying absolutely not, that they would still have the book. Of course, they like the portability of an app and stuff like that. But even just that, maybe this is an age thing. I don't know. I haven't spoken to people maybe under the age of 25, but I think people who grew up with books in their houses, and I've got a ton in the back of mine, and I'm sure
I can
you
see.
do.
I'm facing all my bookshelves.
I'm sure you do. We love that feel, that smell, that physicality of a book that any digital product can never mimic.
I sat last night doing this with the book and just absorb, but then getting it to go the other way wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. But it's the smell, and it's the feel, and it's the beauty of the pages and everything that goes with it. When you look at your illustrations, the colors are spectacular. The distribution, all of that is, I don't want to say much of a muchness to what other books of similar ilk offer, but I think your USP is definitely in the illustrations. And funny enough, I'm opening up a page on the speckled pigeon. I think that used to be called the Ramaron.
No, it used to be called rock dove.
The rock dove. And we had one sitting at our pond the other day eating the algae, and it didn't move. My wife and I stood and looked at it. My cat wandered by, and the bird was going, listen, I'm enjoying a meal. I'm not leaving just because you walk past. It was so cool. It really was. And I think people identify with birds. We get all excited as suburbanites when we see something different, a gymnogene or something. I'm near Delta Park, so we get a lot of interesting birds into our garden. Going back through the illustrations, I love raptors. And these are always the difficult ones. I don't know if you find it, Keith, but you'll be out on a game drive, and the thing is at, I don't know, 35,000 foot, and the ranger, the field guide goes, it's a whatever. And you can't believe or disbelieve him if you don't have a lens or you don't have binoculars. You just have to go, yeah, well, it looks like that. And then you find the bird on a branch, and it's nothing like you thought it was.
Yeah. No, these raptors are truly, truly tricky. They're some of the most confused and confusing groups of birds. And even when you're dealing with people who specialize in raptors, we call them raptor. There's oaks who, and actually it's kind of interesting. I almost started off as one of those because my spark bird was a Lammergeier. And then I ended up, I grew up close to the Walter Sisulu Botanical Gardens.
Right.
And so during standard 8, every single weekday of my vacations, I would wander off and go and watch those eagles and spend 12 hours with making notes and stuff like that. But they're really tricky. And I think You know, don't be shy. People who are experts at these things sometimes get them wrong. Photos always help. And that's a beautiful thing about cameras these days.
Yeah,
Is you're
it's
not
instant.
doing an award-winning photo. What you're doing is you're getting enough information to be able to go home and then send it to your buddy down the road who may know a little bit more than
Yeah.
you, or a Facebook user group or something like that to help you out. And even people who are raptophiles are learning more and more and more about the ID criteria of these birds every single year.
Yeah.
So raptors, there's seabirds, there's larks and pipits, as you pointed out. These are these kind of real nitty-gritty, tricky groups.
Yeah.
And what I like about our book is another good example of, we've got a bunch of illustrations and we're treating only 3 species on this page because they're so confusing. So yeah, we try to really go into focusing on those birds that you really need extra information to come away with a positive ID with.
Yeah.
On those birds quite heavily.
But then also you get juveniles and adults. I mean, I sent a picture of 2 what I thought were different species to a friend, to my birding friend, going, I know what the bird on the right is. The bird on the right is a bateleur. What is the bird on the left? And he went, it's a juvenile bateleur, but they look nothing alike. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and then for a lot of them, it'll be like 5 years of transition plumages.
Yeah.
So you got the juvenile, and then you got your adult, which are cool.
Yeah.
And everything between them, when they're getting all those mottling plumages and they're molting out of certain feathers, it's really tricky. I mean, we try to do it justice, but really some of these groups just really need specialist books if you're going to really focus on them. And maybe not every individual can be identified. You know, you need to be able to walk away from some of these conundrums and just go, you know, the information is there at this time for you to be able to nail this one.
Because you see, this you've just brought this up. There's the transitional period, there's breeding plumage, there's all of that. If I go into the bush and there's a lion, whether it's mating season or not, it's still a lion. It doesn't transition through a leopard and a cheetah and then becomes a lion again. An impala are the same things. An impala is an impala is an impala. You know, there's no what is this? But then you get to the smaller stuff like the steenbok and the duiker, and sometimes if it's bounding away from you and all you can see is a rump, you go, what is that? So I suppose at the end of the day, there are those. Now, we spoke earlier about this particular plate. I see you've used the word common ostrich. I feel very sorry for any species, be it mammal or bird or reptile for that matter, that has the prefix common in front of it. Because we, you and I, Keith, pardon me, are common humans. There are billions of us. There's nothing unique about us. But we don't say we're common. Yet we put this in front of the bird species. The Indian miner has now become the common miner. I'm sure those poor things are desperate to go back to just being Indian miners, to being a nuisance, but to being miners.
Right. I mean, I agree with you. I think common is a bit of a, you know, it's a mildly insulting moniker. But we also sort of somewhat hamstrung by global taxonomy and nomenclature. We try to fit in with people are using the names other people are using, because there is a Somali ostrich, by the way.
Oh, really?
It sounds a whole lot more interesting than the common ostrich.
How does it differ?
The Somali ostrich is a lot bluer in terms of its skin color on the legs and the neck. Doesn't have as much pink. It's much more sort of like a darker sort of skin color when they come into breeding plumage, and otherwise not very different. They used to be considered the same species for a very, very long time.
Okay.
This kind of genetic work that gets done, we then discover, oh, this population is actually different enough, and we're going to call it a species.
Fair enough. Because I'm looking at your ostrich, and this poor male is not ready for breeding. But now looking at that, I'm thinking to myself, maybe if you'd done one leg as a breeding leg, and then made a little note saying, if you see an ostrich with a leg of this color, don't run. Hunker down because it's going to chase you.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, the other fun thing that we were able to do with this book, which hopefully will be good for future editions and or the spin-off projects, is the digital manipulation is really a really cool tool these days to be able to take these beautiful illustrations, then you duplicate it and we can manipulate them slightly so that show that breeding male ostrich next time around too, as an aside.
Now, what happens when names change, as they do from time to time? Does that mean that you have to constantly update the book, or that people know type of thing, that the common ostrich is now just an ostrich? I'm just using this as an example.
I think we just have to roll with, you don't want to be going and buying a new book every other year when a name changes, right?
Yeah.
That's not really practical. I think what tends to happen is every year there's updates and there's a handful of changes. So people just keep it in their minds. Okay, now people are calling this one or that one. What I tried to do in the book is make sure all the alternate names were there.
Yeah.
And then I also described, so every subspecies that is within the region is actually described in the book. And when these things are different enough that they may one day be split off as a separate species, given them in brackets a separate name, which hopefully, if we decide to go whatever, let's say, okay, this is a bad example, but let's say Bokmakiri, and we decide we're going to go northern Bokmakiri, southern Bokmakiri, we've already got those names in the book so that you can see that. So I'm trying to avoid this kind of single, like this is a taxonomy and it's set in stone and it's not changing. We know it's changing all the time. So I'm just trying to bring in a way of dealing with that.
Now, this is the final illustration in the book, and these are from, you'll know better than I, because I should have bookmarked
Atlantic Island. Yeah.
So there you go. Why did you choose?
So why did I choose those? Okay, so basically the book divided up into the main continental African part of the region.
Right.
And then because the whole of the Southern Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean islands and the Indian Ocean islands, they've never been treated in a field guide before anywhere on Earth. Okay. So places like Kerguelen, Marion, Tristan, Gough, these places have never, ever been featured in any field guide ever. And considering that they're sort of in no man's land in the middle of nowhere, if I did it with this book, nobody would have done it. So another cool thing is BirdLife South Africa, which you may or may not.
I do indeed.
Too much about. They're doing these cruises to places like Marion Island. They're trying to raise the profile amongst Southern African birders and raise money for their mouse-free Marion Island project. And so these cruises go down there, and in the old Southern African field guides, we basically, and the old Southern African region, the way the birding listing region is delineated, we have this situation where you go 200 miles south of the South African coast, and then you leave the region. You leave the Southern African. Whereas this is now more inclusive. So if you're going on your Marion Island region, or your Marion Island cruise,
take the book with you.
Take a book with you, but anywhere between Durban and Marion and back to Cape Town is now within the greater Southern African waters. So I described all these birds, all these islands. These are the finches of those islands. I kept them separate as an appendix at the back because I didn't want people getting them muddled up with all the African mainland stuff. So I've done African mainland, and then I've done the islands at the end because they are a bit of an appendix. And, if you're going down to somewhere like Tristan and Gough, these are probably close to being the only small passerines you're going to see. So rather keep them all on one page together.
Indeed. The book, as I say, is stunning. It really and truly is. At the back, you've got all the necessary names. You've got the Latin names, all of that sort of stuff. And I don't think that, I have a birthday coming up, and if I hadn't already received a copy, that I would want this. Is the book available already on bookshelves? How do people get the book? We're winding down time-wise, and I just want to let you put that out there so people know where they can go and buy it.
Sure. So Sunbird Publishers have published the book in Southern Africa. We also have Bloomsbury, the main publishers in the United Kingdom, and Princeton University Press will be publishing the book in the United States. But primarily for South African or Southern African prospective buyers of the book, the best place right now is loot.co.za, which is an online seller. And I don't know how they're doing it. And I'm not even going to ask any questions because I don't think I'm getting any royalties because of this. That's fine. I really don't mind. It's an insane price of 299 Rand at the moment. So the
That's
retail price,
ridiculous. That
yeah,
is
the retail,
ridiculous.
yeah, it's low more. It's cheaper than any other bird book in the region at the.
And it's not even April Fool. So
I know, it's amazing.
Go and
Yeah,
go and buy the
well,
book today.
maybe I'm the fool. I'm getting no royalties. But yeah, it's incredible value at the moment. I think Exclusive will be stocking it. Take a Lot will be stocking it, and Jonathan Ball are the main distributors.
Yeah.
If anybody has any questions, you can always ask them. But I mean, I would just recommend people go to Alert. Everybody who I sent there already has received their copies. They're distributing them nicely. They're doing a great job. And at 299 Rand, I mean, that thing is selling. Don't tell the Brits and the Americans. In the United States, it's selling for $45, and in the UK, it's selling for close to £30. So
Wow.
399 Rand. South Africans often whinge and moan about never really, oh, everything's priced for these people overseas. Well, guess what, South Africans? This is priced for you guys. It's priced for you guys, and it's a good price. So yeah, I think you should go and buy one.
I think they should too. Birds of Greater Southern Africa, published by Sunbirds, written by Keith Barnes, Terry Stevenson, and John Fanshawe, illustrated beautifully by John Gale and Brian Small, and it is available currently. Don't wait until the end of the year. Go and buy it now. Alert.co.za. At $300, $299, you cannot go wrong, really and truly. Keith, thank you so very much for taking time out to chat to me. And as I said to you when we spoke yesterday via text, thank you for coming back to me so quickly, because it helps me as a producer presenter to get content out faster than having to beg an author for weeks and months, by which stage I've forgotten about the book. But it'll be a long. I'm off to the bush on Friday, in fact, and will be coming along. I will indeed.
Thank you very much for having me, David. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat to you. And
only a pleasure, and I look forward to whatever your next project is. I really and truly do. I can't wait, and I've only just got this. The book, once again, Birds of Greater Southern Africa. It's published by Sunbird. Go out and get yourself a copy. This has been In Conversation With. I've been David Batsoff, and he's Keith Barnes. Thanks for joining us.